Three bodies, the bottom of the Atlantic, zero survivors. On July 16, 1999, John F. Kennedy Jr. boarded his small Piper Saratoga plane with his wife Carolyn and his sister-in-law Lauren. 3 hours later, all three were dead. He was 38 years old, a lawyer, a magazine editor, and the most photographed man in America. And the worst part is that people saw it coming. Because John Jr., heir to a surname that kills, sat that July night behind the controls of a plane he should not have been flying, and repeated the exact same pattern that destroyed his father, his uncles, and everyone who carried that name printed on their identity documents. Because John Jr. was not the only one. There was a sister who fled to Greece with her mother to escape the cameras, but the surname followed her until it turned her into the last survivor. There was another who died locked inside an institution for 64 years after her own father destroyed her brain. And there was a brother who lived only 39 hours, just long enough to break his father 3 months before Dallas. Because the Kennedy surname was never just a name, it was a death sentence, inherited at birth. In the 1960s, being a Kennedy meant being untouchable. The White House shone brighter than ever. Jackie Kennedy redefined American elegance. Children played in the Oval Office. Cameras captured every smile, every step, every moment of a family that seemed designed to be perfect. But behind the white columns were three children growing up, without understanding that their childhood was being broadcast live. Caroline was 5 years old when she learned how to smile for the cameras. John Jr. was 3 when he raised a military salute to his father's coffin in front of 100 million viewers. Patrick lived only 2 days. He was born with breathing problems on August 7, 1963, and died on August 9th. And then came Dallas, November 22nd, 1963, 12:30 in the afternoon. Dealey Plaza, one shot, then another, then chaos. And 3 children who lost their father at the exact moment America lost its innocence. But behind the myth were the children. What no one tells you is what it's like to live when your last name is synonymous with tragedy. Carolyn Kennedy was 6 years old when Secret Service agents explained that she could no longer play in the garden without an escort, that anyone approaching her could be dangerous, that her face was so famous that buying an ice cream meant a security operation with 3 agents, 2 escape routes, and 0 chance of normal life. John Jr. was 4 when they told him he could not cry in public, that America was watching him, that he had to be strong because he was a Kennedy, and Kennedys do not break in front of cameras. Jackie Kennedy tried to protect them. She took them out of Washington, moved them to New York, changed their schools every 2 years to stay ahead of the cameras. She built invisible walls around her children, but no matter how many walls she built, the Kennedy surname went straight through them. Every time Caroline wrote her name on a school exam, teachers looked twice. Every time John Jr. tried to make friends, the other children didn't see a boy. They saw the son of the murdered president. They lived inside a bubble where normality was impossible, where every decision became a rumor, where the surname wasn't just a name. It was a symbol they carried on their backs like an iron cross, and no one knew what was coming. For a long time, no one dared to talk about what it really means to inherit a cursed surname. But buried truths always find their way out. In 1968, 5 years after Dallas, Robert Kennedy, uncle of Caroline and John Jr., decided it was his turn, that the Kennedys would return to the White House. On June 5, 1968, after winning the California primary, he walked through the kitchen of the Ambassador Hotel in Los Angeles. A man named Sirhan Sirhan was waiting for him with a .22 caliber revolver. 3 shots. Robert Kennedy died 26 hours later. Caroline was 10 years old when they buried her uncle. John Jr. was 7. And in that moment, they understood something no child should ever understand. The Kennedy surname didn't just attract cameras and applause, it also attracted bullets. Rumors began to spread that the family was cursed, that all Kennedy men died young, that there was something about the name that summoned tragedy like a dark magnet. And the rumors were right. But the Kennedys were not the only ones to carry a cursed surname. There is something I still shouldn't say. I've spent months researching the family of Adolf Hitler, and I found something I have never seen published. When this channel reaches 1,000 subscribers, I will tell that story. Subscribe if you want to hear it, because what I discovered about the Hitlers is not easy to forget. Joseph Kennedy Jr., JFK's older brother, died in 1944 when his plane exploded over the English Channel. He was 29 years old. Kathleen Kennedy died in a plane crash in 1948. She was 28. Now JFK and Robert were assassinated, but what happened next would change everything forever. In that silence, the second lives of Caroline and John Jr. began. The autopsy revealed that the plane had entered a downward spiral, that John Jr. had lost spatial orientation in the fog, that he tried to correct the course but did it in reverse, that he crashed because he no longer knew where up was and where down was. Why would a man who had everything choose to fly a plane under conditions an experienced pilot would have avoided? The answer is simple. Because John Jr. needed to prove that he could do something difficult, that he could control something, that not everything in his life was determined by the surname he inherited. But in the end, what killed him wasn't the fog or his lack of experience. It was the same impulse that killed his Uncle Joe in 1944, his Aunt Kathleen in 1948, his father in 1963, and his Uncle Robert in 1968. The need to be more than a Kennedy, the need to prove something, the need to fly too high, too fast, too alone. After the crash, John F. Kennedy Jr. was cremated, and his ashes were scattered into the Atlantic Ocean from a U.S. Navy ship. Every year, thousands of people still remember the image of the 3-year-old boy saluting his father's coffin. Deep down, John Jr. never stopped being that child. He simply learned how to carry the photograph until the weight finally pulled him out of the sky. Patrick Bouvier Kennedy, the son who died before he had a name. Patrick Bouvier Kennedy was born on August 7, 1963, at Otis Air Force Base in Massachusetts. He arrived 5.5 weeks early. He weighed just over 2 kilograms. He suffered from neonatal respiratory distress syndrome. His lungs were not fully developed. He could not breathe without assistance. He was rushed to Boston Children's Hospital. JFK canceled all his commitments and stayed by the incubator, watching his son fight for every breath. Patrick died on August 9, 1963, at 4:04 in the morning. He lived 39 hours and 12 minutes. JFK held his dead son in his arms for 3 minutes before the nurses took him away. Then he left the hospital, got into the presidential car, and cried. The Secret Service agents, who had never seen him cry before, didn't know what to do. One of them later said, "It was like watching a god break." Jackie Kennedy received the news in her hospital bed. She said nothing. She waited until everyone left the room and then, according to her nurse, let out a scream so sharp it could be heard down the hallway. Patrick was buried on August 10, 1963. The ceremony was private. There was no press, no cameras. But here is what no one tells you. Patrick did not stay alone in that grave for long. In November 1963, 3 months after burying his son, JFK was assassinated in Dallas. And when his body was moved to Arlington, Jackie Kennedy made a decision. Patrick would be exhumed and reburied beside his father. So in December 1963, the small coffin was dug up and transported to Arlington. Today he rests beside JFK, beside Jackie, and beside an unnamed daughter, a fetus Jackie lost in 1956. 4 graves, 1 family. All dead too soon. Patrick Bouvier Kennedy never had the chance to carry the surname. He never knew he was the son of a president. He never felt the weight of the cameras. But his death marked JFK in a way no speech, no crisis, no presidential decision ever could. Historians say JFK changed after Patrick, that he became more reflective, more aware of his own mortality. And perhaps that awareness is what made him lower the car's roof in Dallas 3 months later. Because when you've already watched your child die, bullets stop being frightening. Patrick died without knowing his father. JFK died unable to forget his son, and both ended up in the same grave, united by a surname that kills even those who never live long enough to pronounce it. Rosemary Kennedy, the sister who was erased. Rosemary Kennedy was born on September 13, 1918. She was the 3rd child of Rose and Joseph Kennedy, a beautiful girl with bright eyes and an easy smile. But from the first months, something was off. Rose Kennedy noticed it first. Rosemary reached developmental milestones more slowly. She struggled with speech. She had trouble reading. Today, we would say Rosemary had a mild intellectual disability, In the 1920s, they said she was retarded. And for the Kennedys, a family obsessed with public perfection, Rosemary was a problem. Joseph Kennedy tried to hide her. He sent her to boarding schools where nuns kept her away from cameras. When the family posed for official photographs, Rosemary stood on the edge, serious, unsmiling. But in 1941, when Rosemary was 23, something changed. She began having violent mood swings. She screamed in the middle of the night. She tried to escape the institution. And Joseph Kennedy, terrified that Rosemary would ruin the family's reputation, made the most brutal decision of his life. In November 1941, without consulting Rose or his other children, Joseph Kennedy authorized a frontal lobotomy for Rosemary. The method was simple. A surgical instrument was inserted above the eye, pushed into the brain, and used to sever the connections of the frontal lobe. Dr. Freeman asked Rosemary to sing during the procedure. She began singing, "God Bless America." Halfway through the song, she stopped. Her words became incoherent, and then silence. The lobotomy destroyed Rosemary. She lost the ability to walk without help. She lost coherent speech. She was left with the mental capacity of a 2-year-old. Joseph Kennedy sent her to St. Coletta School in Wisconsin. For the next 20 years, no member of the Kennedy family spoke about Rosemary. She did not appear in official biographies. When people asked about her, the family said, "She's in a convent devoted to God." JFK became president in 1961. The Kennedys shone in Washington. And Rosemary Kennedy remained locked away in Wisconsin, unable to speak, unable to walk on her own, unaware that her family was the most famous in America. It wasn't until 1987, after Joseph Kennedy's death, that the family finally told the truth. Her sister Eunice Kennedy Shriver published an article revealing the lobotomy. Rosemary Kennedy died on January 7, 2005, at the age of 86. She spent 64 years in institutions. She never lived with her family again. She never knew her brother had been president. Rosemary carried the Kennedy surname in a different way. She wasn't killed by a bullet or a plane. She was destroyed by her own family's fear that she wasn't perfect. Kathleen Kennedy, the rebel who defied everything. Kathleen Agnes Kennedy was born on February 20th, 1920. Her siblings called her Kick, and Kick was fearless. In 1938, when her father was appointed ambassador to the United Kingdom, Kick was 18. She moved to London with her family. And that's where she did the unforgivable thing, at least in the eyes of the Kennedys. She fell in love with a Protestant. William Cavendish, Marquis of Hartington, heir to the Duke of Devonshire, met Kick at a party in London. He was handsome, elegant, educated at Eton, and he was Anglican. For Rose Kennedy, a devout Catholic, that meant only one thing. Her daughter was condemning herself to hell. Rose forbade Kick from seeing William. Kick ignored her. She continued seeing him in secret. She wrote him letters. And when World War II broke out in 1939 and William enlisted in the British Army, Kick made the most radical decision of her life. She would stay in London no matter what her family said. In 1944, with the war still raging, Kick and William married at the Chelsea Register Office. It was a civil ceremony. There was no Catholic priest. When Rose Kennedy found out, she stopped speaking to her daughter. The marriage lasted 4 months. On September 9, 1944, William Cavendish was killed in combat in Belgium. A German sniper shot him. He was 26 years old. Kick was 24. Suddenly, she was a widow of a man her family had never accepted. Kick returned to the United States shattered. Her brother Joe Jr. had died just weeks earlier. Her husband was dead. Her mother still refused to speak to her. But Kick didn't give up. In 1946, she returned to London. She bought an apartment in Smith Square. And in 1948, she met Peter Fitzwilliam, a married Protestant count with a reputation as a womanizer. They fell in love. Peter divorced. And Kick decided she would marry him, no matter what her family thought. Rose Kennedy sent her a letter. "If you marry that man, you will be dead to me." On May 13, 1948, Kick and Peter boarded a private plane in Paris. They were flying to Cannes. The flight was supposed to last 2 hours, but the plane entered a storm over the French Alps. At 3:30 in the afternoon, the aircraft crashed into a mountain near Prevas. Kick died instantly. She was 28 years old. Joseph Kennedy flew to France to collect his daughter's body. Rose Kennedy stayed in the United States. She did not attend the funeral. When asked why, she replied, "Kathleen made her choices." Kick was buried in the Cavendish Family Cemetery in Chatsworth, England. She is not buried with the Kennedys in Massachusetts. She is not in Arlington with her brother JFK. She lies in Protestant British soil, far from the family that never accepted her decisions. Kick Kennedy was the only one who tried to escape, the only one who defied the surname, the only one who chose love over family reputation, and the Kennedy name killed her anyway. Because it didn't matter how far she flew, the surname followed her like a shadow, and that shadow always caught up. Ted Kennedy, the brother who survived everything. Edward Moore Kennedy was born on February 22, 1932. He was the ninth and youngest child of Joseph and Rose Kennedy, the little brother, the one no one expected to do anything important. But one by one, his siblings fell. Joe Jr. died in 1944. Kathleen died in 1948. JFK was assassinated in 1963. Bobby was assassinated in 1968. And suddenly, Ted Kennedy, the brother no one took seriously, became the last Kennedy man standing, and the weight was unbearable. Ted was 36 when Bobby was killed. He had been a senator from Massachusetts for 6 years. He wasn't a natural leader like JFK. He didn't have Bobby's magnetic charisma. He was just Ted, competent, hardworking, ordinary, until he had no choice, until America looked at him and said, "You're next." In 1969, Ted Kennedy was the favorite for the 1972 presidential election. Polls showed him 20 points ahead of Richard Nixon. But Ted didn't want to be president. He didn't want to end up like his brothers. He didn't want his children to grow up without a father. He didn't want to die before 50. And then, on July 18, 1969, Ted Kennedy made the worst decision of his life. That night, Ted attended a party on Chappaquiddick Island, Massachusetts. People were drinking. Around 11:15 p.m., Ted decided to leave. A 28-year-old woman named Mary Jo Kopechne asked him to drive her back to the ferry. Ted agreed. They got into his black Oldsmobile. Ted had been drinking all night. He drove down an unlit dirt road. At 11:30 p.m., the car went off Dyke Bridge and plunged into the water. The car overturned. Ted managed to swim out. Mary Jo Kopechne remained trapped inside. And instead of calling for help immediately, Ted Kennedy walked back to his hotel. He didn't call the police. He didn't alert the Coast Guard. He simply left. Mary Jo Kopechne drowned inside the car. Divers found her body 10 hours later. The autopsy revealed that she had survived for hours, breathing the air trapped inside the vehicle. If Ted had asked for help immediately, Mary Jo would have lived. Ted Kennedy was charged with leaving the scene of an accident. He pleaded guilty. He received a suspended sentence. He never spent a day in jail. But his presidential career died that night on Chappaquiddick. For the next 40 years, Ted Kennedy remained a senator from Massachusetts. He was re-elected 9 times. He helped pass more than 2,500 bills. He became one of the most influential senators in U.S. history. But he was never president. And every time he tried to run, someone asked the same question. What happened on Chappaquiddick? Ted Kennedy married twice. He had 3 children. 2 of them developed severe addictions to alcohol and drugs. His daughter Kara died of a heart attack in 2011 at the age of 51. The Kennedy name kept claiming victims, even in the next generation. Ted Kennedy died on August 25, 2009 at the age of 77 from a brain tumor. He was buried in Arlington beside his brothers JFK and Bobby. But what no one said out loud was this. Ted Kennedy was the only brother who died of old age. The only one who wasn't assassinated. The only one who didn't die in a plane crash. The only one who survived. And that survival may have been the greatest curse of all, because Ted Kennedy spent 40 years carrying the guilt of not dying like his brothers, of surviving while they fell, of being the last Kennedy standing while all the others became legends. And when he finally died in a hospital bed, surrounded by his family, at 77 years old with an impeccable political career, the newspaper headline didn't read, "The most influential senator of the 20th century dies." It read, "The last Kennedy brother dies." Because the surname never allowed him to be Ted. It only allowed him to be the last one. The curse continues. The grandchildren. And then when there were no brothers left, when there were no children of JFK left, when the Kennedy surname finally seemed destined to fade away, a new generation appeared. In 1984, David Kennedy, son of Robert Kennedy, died of a drug overdose in a Palm Beach hotel. He was 28 years old. He said he never recovered from watching his father's assassination on television at the age of 13. In 1997, Michael Kennedy, another son of Robert, died in a skiing accident in Aspen. He was 39. He was skiing at high speed while throwing a football. He crashed into a tree and died instantly. In 1999, John F. Kennedy Jr. crashed into the Atlantic. In 2012, Kara Kennedy, daughter of Ted Kennedy, died of a heart attack after a workout. She was 51. In 2019, Saoirse Kennedy Hill, granddaughter of Robert Kennedy, died of an accidental overdose at the family property in Hyannisport. She was 22. She had written in her journal, "The Kennedy name is an impossible burden to carry." And in 2020, Maeve Kennedy McKean, another granddaughter of Robert Kennedy, disappeared along with her 8-year-old son while kayaking in the Chesapeake Bay. Their bodies were found days later. Maeve was 40, 7 grandchildren dead, all before the age of 55, none from natural causes, and those who remain alive carry something worse than death, the constant expectation that they will be next. Because that is what it means to be a Kennedy in 2025. It doesn't mean power. It doesn't mean glory. It means living while waiting for the next funeral. Today in 2025, few Kennedys remain in the public sphere. Caroline Kennedy is 67. She is still the invisible Kennedy. She works with cultural foundations. She avoids interviews. She lives in New York as if the surname were a secret only she knows. Robert F. Kennedy Jr., Bobby's son, is 71. He is devoted to vaccine conspiracy theories. His family has publicly distanced itself from him multiple times. Joe Kennedy III, great-grandson of Joseph Kennedy, is 44. He was a congressman from Massachusetts. He ran for the Senate in 2020 and lost. Today, he is a special envoy to Northern Ireland. He is competent, intelligent, and completely forgettable. And that is the final irony. The Kennedys who survive are the ones who manage to be ordinary, the ones who don't try to be extraordinary, the ones who accept that the surname no longer means anything, except a list of obituaries. So what happened to the children of John F. Kennedy? Caroline chose invisibility and survived. John Jr. chose risk and died. Patrick never had the chance to choose. But beyond them were dozens of Kennedys who tried to carry a surname that weighed more than any human life could endure. Some fled, some hid, some rebelled, some destroyed themselves, and all of them, without exception, discovered the same truth. The Kennedy surname is not a legacy, it is a sentence. Because when your father changes the world, when your uncle is murdered on live television, when your name appears in history books before you learn how to read, you stop being a person. You become a symbol, and symbols do not cry, they do not doubt, they do not fail. Symbols only die. For years, the world believed the Kennedys were different, that they were special, that there was something in their blood that made them greater than the rest of us. But the truth is simpler and far more devastating. The Kennedys were not special. They were human beings who tried to be gods. And when gods fall, they always fall harder. Because in the end, power fades. Speeches are forgotten. Photographs turn yellow. But the echo remains. And that echo still resonates in every Kennedy born with a surname that no longer promises greatness, only pain. There are other surnames that were also a sentence. One of them is almost never spoken about, the children of Adolf Hitler. When this channel reaches 1,000 subscribers, I will tell you what I found. Subscribe if you don't want to miss that story. Some truths are told only once. The truths silenced for decades have finally found their voice. But some are still waiting in the darkness, and you decide whether you want to hear them.